Thursday, December 9th. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is Geek Nights. It is the year 2010.
Yawn.
Tonight on Geek Nights, we discuss the book club book, World War Z by Max Brooks.
Let's do this. Oh, you managed not to say that the book sucks in the opening part of the show.
You want to know why? I was yawning.
Yeah. We got some yawning issues over here. Are they cleared up now?
Yeah, we got some opening issues too. I think Scott is the perpetrator of the yawning. I think he started this whole thing.
It's not, you can't blame someone for a yawn. That's like blaming someone for pooping. It's like, it's natural. It's got to happen.
Much like that Katsucon way back. I mean, we all got sick. Like, everyone in the goddamn world got sick. But I do believe that you were the one who got sick first.
Okay.
That you brought this illness upon the rest of us, much like the yawning just now.
Yeah, you know, I mean, you could blame someone for getting sick if they did something stupid. For example, rub sewage on an open wound and get infected, right? Or, you
lead
know,
a sedentary lifestyle.
not wipe their ass or swim in the Ganges. You know, I mean, there are plenty of ways someone can get themselves, drink dirty water, get dysentery, right?
Unpasteurized milk.
Go out where all the nasty malaria mosquitoes are and rub yourself in mosquito food, whatever they eat.
Blood?
So you know, cut yourself so the blood comes out, so the mosquitoes swarm. You know, can they smell the blood if you cut yourself? I don't even know.
I think they smell the CO2 you're breathing.
Spray some,
blood.
you know, mosquito pheromones so they come over to you, and then, right, you could do all sorts of stuff. But then they fuck your arm instead of eating. I don't know. The point is that there are a lot of things you can do to purposefully get sick. But if someone has not done any of those things, and that is the vast, overwhelming majority of human beings, do not intentionally do any of those things, right? So then you can't really blame someone for getting sick.
However,
it's not something they do on their own.
I do avoid people who have been exposed to children if the children are sick.
Yeah, I got a coworker. His kid, you know, is going to the daycare and basically is a germ magnet. But you know, if you have a kid, you kind of want that because that makes a healthier kid. There are studies and they're pretty much figuring out that most of the allergy type kids who are allergic to everything and get sick all the time later in life are because their parents didn't let them roll around in the mud when they were smaller. So let them roll in the mud, send them to daycare. They'll get sick early on. They won't get sick later.
Yep. I mean,
as long as they don't get, you know, the death sickness.
I rarely got sick when I worked at the hospital, hanging out with hospital people.
Well, you also got crazy vaccinated at the hospital.
Only to one or two things, and I did get sick a whole bunch right away when I first worked there. And then I stopped getting sick.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah.
Imagine if you worked at the hospital when you were 0. You'd be like invincible. Like me.
I was in the hospital when I was 0.
Yeah, me too. Big surprise.
I went back when I got the really bad flu, when I was like 2 or 3-ish.
I went back when my brother was in the hospital when he was 0.
But much more importantly, Scott, warm today.
No.
It is quite warm out.
I thought I was thinking of the joke, but then I realized it's not. It is one of those jokes that all the listeners will go, "Oh, man," but I'll be like, "Oh, no."
What's the joke?
So basically, I was like, "Man, you know what? We should totally move somewhere that's way south, like the Caribbean." You know why?
Live on a barge.
You know why we should move there?
Why should we move there?
Because there's no woman.
No cry either. That wasn't that bad. We could have made more inside jokes.
No, but I figured the listeners would be like, "Oh, you guys are gay. You want to move where there's no woman."
I mean, when was the last time we were like, yeah?
Because we haven't been playing NS because NS2 is not doing so.
No, it's not. Or I mean, when was the last time you held 10 somethings?
Yesterday.
Or couldn't hold 10 something. What 10 things did you hold?
Hershey Kisses, a variety of flavors.
Yeah, I learned that we can both have and eat 10 of those.
We got a whole bucket, but it's emptying quickly at the office. I don't think I'm refilling it, not on my dime.
So it's a Yawnin' Thursday show. It's a book club show, and we don't want to kind of taint the book club by doing like 20 minutes of unrelated news because then kind of lose the timeliness of the book club show.
Yeah, and I have a feeling people who care about the book club fast forward and get to the book.
Get to the book. So, should we, here's a point of order, Scott, other than saying the year, should we do the World War Z first, or should we sell the next book first?
I think we should sell the next book first because there might be someone who has not yet read the World War Z, doesn't want to spoil it, but might be listening, and therefore they won't have to skip ahead and fiddle about in the show. But if we put World War Z first, then someone might have to skip around.
But I got a spoiler for you. There's zombies. They rise up. It sucks.
I think it says that on the cover.
Humans survive in the end.
I think that's why it's not a zombie book.
So when I was a kid, when I was pretty young, like 1995, 96, I got this book. I don't even remember how I got it or how I got interested in it. I don't know if my parents bought it for me or if I just found it or a physics teacher. I don't know, but I picked up Michio Kaku's Hyperspace and I read it, and it was amazing and fascinating. Like, that was my first knowledge of string theory or hyperspace or multidimensionalism or anything ever that was realistic.
I mean, I sort of knew about multidimensionalism, kind of, but I didn't know of anything else, and I never read this book.
Plus, when? I'm talking like 1995, give or take? I mean,
maybe-ish.
did you know about string theory and quarks and supersymmetry back then?
Probably in 97.
97?
I knew they existed.
So,
because that was, second year of high school, I definitely knew of those things.
Hyperspace?
Not that I know any more of the detailed information than I do now.
Michio Kaku is a renowned and important physicist, and kind of like Carl Sagan, he goes around promoting science and scientism and people caring about science.
Yeah, he's a professor at CUNY, which is it's in the city. I can probably see it from here.
Yep. And Hyperspace, the actual title is Hyperspace: A Scientific Odyssey Through Parallel Universes, Time Warps, and the 10th Dimension. Oh, I guess it was made in 1994, so I guess, or at least published in 94. So I guess I read it shortly after it came out. But it basically takes all this crazy string theory stuff and breaks it down into really accessible and understandable chunks that anyone intelligent can grasp.
So it's a nonfiction book.
It's a nonfiction book. I much prefer the nonfictions over the fictions. Hey, you're the one who made me read fucking World War Z. You can suck it.
It was not for you.
Yeah,
for the listeners.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't for me. You know what? I guess nonfiction isn't for you.
I like some nonfictions.
The cool thing, though, Hyperspace...
I tend to reference nonfictions. I don't like to read them straight through.
It pushes, in the end, the whole last question thing that I like to bring up all the time.
Oh, yeah, I love that shit.
And it also brings up Flatland. I think I was
also love that shit.
to Flatland by Hyperspace.
You know what's good about Flatland? It's really tiny. It's this really short book. You can read it in like a day.
I thought you meant the Flatland Worlds. Like, it doesn't say how big it is. I mean, we know Gandalf's penis is 7 inches, but we have no idea how big Flatland is.
That's not. I can do a whole nonfiction book if it's as short as Flatland.
Flatland was fiction.
I know. I'm just saying, if a nonfiction book is the length of the Flatland fiction book.
What was the last nonfiction book you read?
Well, actually, I read two. There's actually a certain kind of nonfiction that I can read straight through, and I've actually read 2 of these so far in my life.
The narrative nonfiction?
Yeah, the one where it's like you wouldn't know it was nonfiction if they didn't say so, right? So there was the...
like Star Wars, or...
Yeah, I actually forget the title. It's like Devil in the White City. Is that what it's called? The Chicago World's Fair one. Right, and there's also the other one I read, which is about
the pirate one,
Captain Kidd. Yeah. So it's like those are true stories. This is a true story of Captain Kidd, pretty much.
Well,
right?
Scott, this is the true story,
and the true story of
10 dimensions in hyperspace.
Yeah, but it's not. There's not characters in a narrative, and it's not exciting. It's basically the kind of nonfiction.
Wait. So you don't find exciting the fundamental unifying theories of all reality?
Oh, I absolutely do. However, I don't find exciting reading about them for hours.
Did you enjoy Cosmos?
Yeah, but...
this is like that, only for string theory.
The thing was Cosmos, right, was short, number 1.
This is not a long book.
And number 2, Cosmos has a lot of stories of historical figures for, story...
Sure, you get to learn about Tycho Brahe and
exactly,
his nose.
That's what I'm talking about, right?
You get to learn a little bit about Einstein, and chapter 6 is Einstein's revenge.
And while I enjoyed Cosmos, right, it wasn't like I was dying to turn the page, as I am frequently in various works of fiction.
All right, so what kind of book should I pick next time? Maybe The Count of Monte Cristo and all of its 1,000 pages?
No.
That is actually one of my favorite books. I've been meaning to pick it at some point.
No, I'm going to read abridged. I'll read Cliff's Notes.
Yeah, you'll really do yourself a disservice. There's a lot of good... You'll miss it, like the chainmail and when he stabs the dude and all the poison. And
I'll watch the movie.
You realize that The Count of Monte Cristo is kind of famous for the fact that no one has ever made a good adaptation of it.
I know. Actually, you know what we should do? You should do, not the Count of Monte Cristo, but you should like go sideways. You should do like the Man in the Iron Mask, who is much more badass.
The Man in the Iron Mask is not even a quarter as badass as the Count.
What are you talking about?
The Count is the baddest ass there ever was.
The dude was locked up for that long.
So was this dude.
And then he busted out and got his awesome revenge.
So did the Count.
Yeah, but I mean, the Count wasn't locked up as bad.
He was locked up worse, Scott.
And he wasn't
He was locked up for most of his life in a dungeon.
But the guy in the Iron Mask, he was supposed to be the king.
Yeah, the Count was just a
That's
poor
why they
sailor
That's why they
guy.
put the mask on him so no one would see who he was, because then they would know, hey, that's supposed to be the king. What the
Count
fuck?
was just a poor sailor guy who got shanghaied into some BS.
Yeah, he was just some scummy guy.
No, he was a nice guy actually. And then he grew up to be a badass, and he took everybody else out.
This guy was a king. I like reading about kings.
He's helping everybody.
Not about sailors. Anyway,
he sails.
Dude, we should. Someone needs to make fan arts. Man in Iron Mask versus Count of Monte Cristo. Fight!
No, Man in the Iron Mask versus the Count of Monte Cristo versus Batman.
They're basically all Batmans of.
Yeah. I don't think Batman could have. I don't know, because reading Dark Knight Returns, when he's old, he's still kicking some ass. I mean, the Count of Monte Cristo, he's in his 40s when he's doing his awesome.
Mm.
Man in the Iron Mask was younger, so.
He was indeed younger. He must have been like 30s, right?
Yeah, not as badass.
Actually, I have no idea how old he was.
Have you ever actually read The Man in the Iron Mask?
Part of it.
Oh, really? Part.
I know what you need to know about it.
There's a man in a mask.
No,
and he was the king.
There were two princes, right? And one wanted to become the king, and so he freaking locked his brother up in there and put a mask on him. And he made everyone else believe that his brother was dead. So he became the king. Meanwhile, the older brother, was supposed to become the king. He was locked up, and even the guards didn't know. They thought he was just some prisoner, who was incredibly dangerous or evil or some shit. And eventually, he got out, and yeah, it was awesome.
Well, I could pick Ulysses.
No, you don't even want to pick that.
No, I don't. No.
I've got my next 3 picks lined up, and
Really?
they are all awesome.
What, The Little Prince?
That's one.
That's a good one. I almost picked it a couple times.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got better than that though.
Seriously, as a kid, when I was young, reading Hyperspace, I was enthralled. I remember once I started reading it, I obsessively skipped most other things in my life to finish it. Because all I remember thinking just constantly throughout this whole book was, these are the motherfucking secrets of the goddamn universe.
Yeah,
Holy shit.
Another thing though is how many of the things in hyperspace are still, because the high level theoretical physics is changing, there's a lot of arguments and debates in that area, so it's like, is this right or is the other guy right, or and I don't know.
Well, what other guy?
All the other different guys.
You act like there's a specific guy to whom you were referring.
I just forgot. I just remembered that there was a guy, something reason. I can't remember. It's just like, when you got a thing in your brain, like, oh, I remembered there was a guy who had some crazy theory. Oh, what the hell was that guy? And I can't remember.
Those brown guys.
Yeah.
I see them all over the place.
Anyway.
But anyway, things of the day. Those brown guys, by the way, are groundhogs. Scott didn't know what they were. And one day he's like, those little brown guys, they run away when I walk by the train station. We're like, groundhogs? He's like, yeah, the brown guys.
I don't think those are groundhogs.
Those are groundhogs.
No, because then what are those guys who come out of the hole in the ground?
There's also woodchucks and beavers and all sorts of little brown guys. But
yeah,
those,
I have a feeling those are woodchucks, and they were not, because they weren't beavers, because they didn't have a flappy tail, right? And they, they didn't come out of the ground in the hole, so they weren't the prairie dogs.
Prairie dogs are kind of tan. They're not really brown.
Whatever.
They also don't
tan
live.
is brown.
They also don't live anywhere near here, and they stand up, and they're much smaller.
Anyway,
so our friend Conrad, this has become an affectation of his, and it wore off rapidly. I feel like it's a very useful phrase, but it caused me to Google for some things that I recommend you all looking out. For example, Jerry Springer, not that good of a show. Jerry Springer in India, pretty goddamn funny.
I gotta say though, I mean, I didn't watch. I haven't even thought about Jerry Springer since the late 90s. But one time I was on a bus trip full of teenagers and high school kids, and we were going somewhere. I forget where the hell we were going.
When was this?
High school.
Oh, okay. Because you were like, I was on a bus with a bunch of high school kids. I'm like,
Because
Scott,
I was in high school.
what are you doing?
It was a field trip somewhere, and they watched Jerry Springer the movie, and at the time, in that environment, there was some hilarity.
But so this phrase, how can she slap? How can she slap? It just, there's this like game show going on, and this woman is yelling at this guy, and he is kind of snarky back at her, and she slaps him. And he, not taking that shit, just slaps her right back.
Yeah.
And then he pauses and he looks at her and he has this look on his face like he cannot believe what just happened. And he just starts exclaiming over and over again, how can she slap? How can she slap? As everyone else proceeds to beat the crap out of him. And there's this whole, it's just, there's something about the way he says it. I feel like if and Conrad apparently he was playing a video game like Pac-Man or something, and suddenly like he loses or he messes up. How can she slap?
See, I don't know. It's like, should you use the how can she slap, or should you do how can she blank, right? So, like, if, somebody trips over, like, how can she trip? How can she trip? Or, if some...
Scott, how can you bomb? How can you bomb?
How can you podcast? How can you podcast? Should you change the verb to
also,
get it?
later on, he says very eloquently under his breath, fucking son of a piece of shit. But how can she slap does it? So
how can you fuck?
That's my thing of the day. Use this phrase well. I feel like it will be very useful to you in the future.
All right. So, so check this out, right? Everyone's on the internet has probably seen this already, but this guy, he did a mashup. He mashed up two amazing things. Star Wars, the most frequent mashup target in the universe. And Dr. Seuss, a pretty frequent mashup target, and he mashed them, which I don't think they've been mashed before.
Funnily enough, on College Humor today, there was a children's sci-fi book spoof, and it was Doctor Who in a Dr. Seuss style.
Double Doctor.
Yeah.
Double Doctor.
How can you have a double doctor?
I'll just say a couple sentences here, and you'll get the idea. But there are awesome illustrations that accompany.
They're pretty good.
So, you ready? This body is old, but it's all that I've got. When 900 you reach, looks so good you will not. Oh, snap.
It's a good Yoda, too. It's very Seussian.
Yeah, it's basically Dr. Seuss Yoda. They got Dr. Seuss Jabba the Hutt. They got Dr. Seuss Darth Vader. Dr. Seuss Wookiee.
It saddens me that just from DDR and karaoke combined.
Wookiee.
Yeah, the anytime I hear or see a Wookiee, my first thought is not, "Raw." I can't make the noise. Or that, my first thought is the guy who has that cabinet that sounds like a Wookiee.
And then the way to make a Wookiee noise is to think about that. No, you think about that cabinet door.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. My second thought is Wookiee in the kitchen. Macho Man is on a mission.
Yep, that's right.
My third thought is actual Wookiees from real Star Wars, the documentary. So, you picked this book.
Oh, I did pick this book, right? So,
wow, we're the yawning show is just continuing.
Yeah. Anyway, so the book is World War Z. I think this is a subtitle, but I don't have
an oral history of the zombie.
An oral history. That's not right.
I don't want to make fun of it. I'm trying not to. It's just.
But anyway, I picked this. Normally, right? I could tell even before I read it or before I knew anything about it, just based on the title. It's by Max Brooks, who I later learned is actually the son of Mel Brooks. Of comedy awesomeness of Blazing Saddles and producers and that the real Mel Brooks, Spaceballs. His son is Max Brooks, even though I didn't know that until later. Anyway,
yeah, you'd think this would have been funnier then,
right? So clearly did not inherit the genes. So anyway, I knew just from the title of the book, right, that this was basically one of those books that appeals to nerds with its proper nounness, right? It's like you could take pretty much any, subject matter that nerds like, be it like Frankenstein's monkey, robot, pirate, ninja, zombie, right?
Yeah, whatever's in at the given time.
Right, and sometimes when you take those vampires, sometimes when you take those things and mix them all together, you can actually do a good job of it, right? Dr. Big Ninja is the perfect example. Axe Cop, also, you can definitely do things that are high quality with the, it's not...
but at the same time, for example, Dr. McNinja has this very pure idea of what would be awesome to a 12-year-old. And he knows what he's doing.
I'm just saying, right? So, I knew that World War Z was one of those things, right? But there was a chance that it was good in the Dr. McNinja way, but I didn't really expect it, to be good. I expected it to be a lot like Cowboys vs. Aliens, which I'm really surprised is becoming a movie because that is the worst comic book that I've bought in, years.
That's one of those comic books where you see it at the show. You're at like an indie comic
I bought
fair.
it off of the order form based on the title.
But that's it. The title is all there is. Seeing the title is the only thing you need to see. You've already read the entire comic. The concept is the entirety of the idea.
Yes. So I'm like, okay, someone wrote a book about zombies. This is going to be just like those, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, or
I heard those are actually okay.
Yeah, I don't know how good they are because I haven't read them, but I assumed.
Well, maybe I should pick it for the book club book.
I categorized World War Z in that same category, right, as the Pride and Prejudice and Zombies and all the, and I think there's a Lincoln one now, right? I put it in that same bucket, in my brain of stuff that just is basically pandering to nerds without actually being good and being kind of shallow,
like the IT crowd.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I can't remember. There's but there's the these sitcoms. I think there's one or two of them now, where it's basically the same as every other sitcom, except they just instead of making a joke about whatever I guess regular sitcoms make jokes about.
What do regular sitcoms make jokes about?
I don't
Scott?
even know because I don't watch them.
I mean, Seinfeld was a sitcom.
That's true, but Seinfeld made jokes about nothing, so therefore is unique.
So replace all the nothing with nerd proper nouns, and there you go.
Exactly, right? For example, right, Seinfeld has nerdiness, but he doesn't come out with it. He's got Superman in the background, just on his desk. He doesn't actually, come out with the Superman and say, oh man, that's like the time when Superman, kryptonite, blah, blah, blah.
Occasionally he does.
Anyway. So I figured, this World War Z book, it was recommended. If you remember when we interviewed, Mark from Vanilla, he said he liked it.
I don't remember that at all.
Yeah, he did. He suggested it to us.
Uh-huh.
So I was like, all right, this book, even if I don't like it, because I didn't expect to like it, but I give anything a chance, you know, and I did have hope that it would be Dr. McNinja or whatever.
I went in with low to moderate expectations, but not bottom expectations.
No, I mean,
And it wasn't bottom by any stretch.
No.
I'll say that now.
But, and plus I did a similar thing with Loch Lammer, right? Loch Lammer, it was like, okay, I'm going to pick a book that I don't think a lot of people know about, but it was highly recommended, and I'm pretty sure is just pandering to nerds, but will be, a fun wild ride. So I was like, okay, this book, I don't know if it's good or bad, but I know that it appeals to the audience, right?
We survived the zombie apocalypse, but how many of us are still haunted by that terrible time? We have temporarily defeated the living dead, but at what cost? Told in the haunting and riveting voices of the men and women who witnessed the horror firsthand.
Yeah.
World War Z is the only record of the plague years.
Yep.
That little temporarily there, that sums up 90% of my problems with World War Z. That he writes in this infuriating, I'm so clever style, and every character has this little wink and a nod to other stuff constantly.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
We'll get to that, but
I picked the book because it would appeal to listeners and get people to read, and I hope it succeeded in that. I read it.
Scott, so how does it succeed? All right, we got everyone to read a book. Let's say that they really liked it because, zombies, whatever.
All right.
So we're like, yeah, you should read books. Try this one. They're like, yeah, I read it and I liked it. And then we shit all over the book that we just told them to read.
But that's fine. It even if you like it, good for you.
Yeah.
And you're reading, and it's not a sports page or a magazine. It's a book.
Actually,
so now go and read other books that we also won't like that are similar, but you will like them and you will be reading. So awesome.
It was funny. Before you came over, Aaron C. We're hanging out. He walks in. He sees the book on my desk. So I got it out. He's like, "Oh, World War Z. That's a good book." And I was just like, "Well,
right." So the book, right? In my opinion, it's not terrible. It's not like I was in pain reading it.
Nah, a couple of moments though.
There were. That's the thing, right? Is there were moments of throughout, but I wasn't like, oh, I can't go on. It's so painful. Well, it was just here and there. I'd be like, and at the same time, I cannot say that it was a page turner. I just sort of turned the page out of habit. I wasn't like dying to read the next page. There was nothing pushing me forward, but there was also nothing pushing me back. It was just a slow walk.
What's interesting to me is that I started World War Z with pretty low expectations. I mean, I went into this thinking this is going to be pretty bad, but I was pleasantly surprised. Like the first, I don't know, 20 or 30 pages, I was like, this is actually pretty engaging. This is actually pretty well done.
Well, I sort of had a similar thing, right? And what engaged me about the early part of the book, I think, was mostly the format. Because no matter what the writing or the plot or anything, the format of the book is not unique, but it is rare and sort of interesting and clever, right? It's this oral history of the zombie world. So basically, each chapter introduces you to a new character who tells their story. So it's like a whole bunch of short stories all in the same universe. And you never actually get the straight up story of the universe. But what you do is you get all these individual people's stories of, what happened to them in the zombie war. And then you add them all together, and as you read more and more stories, you just learn by osmosis all these, things, and you get the whole picture of what happened in the zombie war.
It lets you get away as an author with a couple of things, too. Say you've got good vignettes. You've got good ideas for, like, all right, there's a real zombie apocalypse. What are the interesting bits? Well, the last stand of the military is an interesting bit. Or what the fuck happens in North Korea? Like, all these individual bits. And then you can kind of skip the before and the after, and every story can be in media res right at the good part.
Yeah, it also sort of gets away from, the ridiculous action movie sort of thing, right? Because when you have an action movie, all the interesting bits have to involve the main action hero. So you have to come up with sort of this ludicrous winding path for him or her to always be in some ridiculously awesome scene.
Or Daddy Two Heroes.
That's true. But, you have to still have to have both of them always at the right place at the right time where the big shit is going down. And here, he doesn't need to do that. He can just be like, and it actually is a more realistic story that way, because there's no one who's always where the action is going down.
Yeah, but he also gets around the fact that, it's improbable people would survive by, well, these are the few people who did. These are the people with the crazy stories.
Yeah, I still, in general, zombie story, everyone needs to die. No, you're not a...
Well, there's two separate genres of zombie story. There's the people make it out and people don't make it out. And they're like two completely different genres.
Well, the thing is, for me, a zombie story, they never make it out. But what you can do is you can drag it on. It's not about whether they make it out or not.
You've seen the original Night of the Living Dead, right?
I think so.
Scott, do they make it out?
They shouldn't.
Because that I think defines the genre of that movie, which I don't think you've seen. I don't think you...
Dawn of the Dead, they don't make it.
Dawn of the Dead is a very different movie from Night of the Living Dead.
I like Dawn of the Dead better.
Than the movie you've never seen.
Yeah, okay.
So going into this one, all right, that's a crutch an author can use to really skip to the meat, and I was excited about that because
even though it's a crush, it's still for the writer. It doesn't hurt the reader. You're getting awesome stuff in every chapter.
Because I didn't want to have to deal with the Harry Turtledove situation where he tells interesting, pretty realistic fiction about what if the Civil War didn't resolve itself? How would the next 100 years play out? But because he tells it as a straight narrative, he follows these characters I don't care about, and he writes these really awkward sex scenes all over the place.
You got to come, a lot of people come up, look at Urasawa, right? He comes up with a character and you're like, oh, I don't care about this guy until the next page when you care about them more than anything.
Yep,
right?
Even Trigun, Brado.
Yeah, right? So if you're going to be a writer and you're going to have characters, you need to have that skill where you can make someone care about a brand new person you just made up within a couple pages.
But, it was going strong in this because the narrative was good, the characters were interesting, and then 4 or 5 stories in, I realized that all the characters sounded the same.
Yeah, it's sometimes, a character would have an accent or a mannerism.
But it was always forced and affected. It stood out like he's trying to write this guy differently.
Yeah. And, the other thing was, it's like every character, they didn't have varying levels of intelligence. They all, even if they, you would see in the beginning of a chapter, they would, have this, affectation that was unique to the character, kind of. But then this character would sort of fall back into explaining things in the same way every other character explained things, which is the way the writer explained them.
But coupling that with, I think the moment when I realized I really didn't like this book, when I went from this is pretty good to this is okay to I don't like it, was the story about the woman. I say woman here because I thought it was a man until the end, just because the way it was written, who was shot down and like lost out in the wilderness.
That was actually later on, that one.
It wasn't that far in.
It was
though.
pretty close to it. Was beyond the halfway point.
Was it?
Yeah.
I barely remember. I just remember like that moment, as I forgot the entire time it was a woman. Because of the way it was portrayed, it sounded like every other character, and most of them were guys. And the whole time, like, at the end, there really wasn't someone. You're just crazy.
I saw that coming a mile away.
Yeah, but it was telegraphed and forced. And I realized then that almost all the stories have a sort of quote unquote clever wink and a nod, like, oh, well, here's the bit about this story. Here's the shtick on this story. Here's the gimmick on this story. And every one had a kind of lame gimmick stuck onto it.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, the thing that bothered me the most, right, were sort of the forced nerdisms that showed up around, right?
The otaku?
Well, I mean, the otaku is a huge... But here's a small example, right? When they were talking about the people in the space station, right?
Yeah.
And they talked about, like, oh, yeah, there are these little robots who are outside the space. He was talking about all the different parts of the space station, right? And he's like, oh, yeah, and then there's the bobas that fly around with their little... And I'm like,
all the made-up acronyms and terms from this world.
Yeah, it's like, okay, they made a Star Wars joke. Obviously, the little robots look like Boba Fett because they have little jetpacks on them. But it's like, he did that. Throwing one of those in there, might make sense. If the guy in the space station being a nerd, I could buy that.
Well, like he did.
But there were like one or two of those pretty frequently.
Remember when the military figured it all out? The Sandlers, the Water Boys.
Yeah, it's like because he threw these references in there, and it was they were just so obvious, thumb sticking out, appeals to nerdism and pop culture in there. It was just like every time he did that, I was just like, could you have made that, less smooth, not funny, and also not timeless.
Well, he does that too. A lot of times he'll use a new term and he'll explain what it means, or he'll have a weird footnote about something. They're like Shirotasms, but not quite on the scale of Shiro.
Yeah, it's like that doesn't, if it's supposed to be about zombies, it's supposed to be like, there should be some suspense, or there should be horror, or, even, there's some gore in here, right?
There was basically zero suspense.
But there's actually, it's actually much too light-hearted. Like, the people aren't really that upset.
And the ones that are upset in this kind of unrealistic and cliched way. Like he writes them like, all right, this guy's obviously damaged psychologically.
Think about,
I'm going to write him damaged. He's the damaged guy.
I mean, if you
see how he pauses all the time, see how he looks wistfully off at the sunset, it hurt.
Well, I mean, technically speaking, right, this is supposed to be this one guy, this character you never get to know, who goes around interviewing all these people, and these are all the interviews compiled, that were taken out of his official report, because they basically, in the introduction, it's like, oh, this guy did a report on the zombie war, and he handed it into the government, and they made him split it up into the personal parts and the just straight, flat, boring government report part. So this is all the parts that were taken out, of the non-existent fictional report, and that had personal stories all compiled in order. So this guy that did the interviews, right, every time he went to interview someone, it sort of was basically the same thing, right? Remember in Gasaraki, the guy with no eyes?
Yeah.
It was like, okay, next chapter. So he goes into the room, and there's the guy with no eyes who tells them about the zombie war. And next chapter, he goes into the room, and there's the person with no eyes who tells them. Right? And every chapter, that's what it was. He was going to see the badass guy in Australia, or the badass person in the whatever, the badass otaku at his play. It was.
Granted, you could rationalize that only the badasses survived.
Well, that's true too, but the point is that it seemed like every chapter it was going to see one of these people, and it was like the same scene repeated and repeated. It was just like,
but there's a lot of kind of modern, like current political situation satire ham-fisted in, like little winks and nods to like, yeah, well, when they banned something or legalized things that.
Oh yeah, when they were basically he had a huge. A lot of the stuff he put in there was basically huge social commentary that was not smooth at all. Like the whole thing with the drug to make a comment about, the pharmaceutical industry.
That's
selling a fake medicine.
That really bothered me. That character who was so literally like, I just did it for the money. Screw everybody. It was just so painful to read because it was so poorly done.
Yeah, it's just really. And then, oh, you know what else is pretty painful? Oh, the whole military efficiency thing.
Yeah.
Where they went into like great lengths to talk about the guns that don't jam and the shovels that can also kill zombies and the bodysuits that they can't bite you through. And it's like,
You mean the obvious boring side? It is definitely one of those worlds where zombies rise up and no one has ever seen a zombie movie.
yeah, I mean, and the scene where they were the U.S. guys, they get in a square and they have infinite ammo.
Now, see, the square, the way he wrote that, he must have just read some history books recently, or like maybe he was like, I gotta look up what old military formations were like. Oh, squares.
Yeah,
Because that's kind of how they were.
yeah.
All the military stuff was really unrealistically kind of painful.
They should have Chiro do it. he would have been like, yeah, all right, we just invented cyborg. And that's another thing, right? Is it sort of felt, some points, it felt like he was talking about a near future, like 10, 20 years from now.
Yep.
But making a joke about the water boy. It's like no one would make a joke about the water boy 10, 20 years from now.
Now, kind of like how miraculously in Star Trek, most of the references to culture on Earth is from the 19th and 20th century.
Right. That's why, the really good stuff just doesn't, don't be topical ever, and your stuff will last longer and be better, because it won't, only be popular for some period of time, or, that's what separates a genre from a movement, right? A movement only sticks around for a little bit, but a genre is, it's just forever.
Well, a movie like Shrek that's basically just haha celebrity name, haha celebrity name.
Yeah, and I think definitely what we're seeing now is a zombie movement, right? I don't think it's really a genre. I mean, it is been around since what, the 80s maybe, kind of.
Well, maybe you should watch Night of the Living Dead to see what it should really be like.
Yeah, but it's really I think it's going downhill.
I think the most egregious example of just the style of writing and what bothered me about it, plot-wise, not all the other things, is the whole North Korea bit. We don't know. Check this out. I thought of something cool. We don't know what happened to North Korea. They're just gone.
Yeah. Okay.
No one went to find out.
Yeah,
we didn't even try.
No one would go to find out because there'd be landmines.
Yeah,
they
well,
don't
I'm
walk.
sure.
They don't want to walk.
You're not
going
to fly over? You're not going to take a peek?
Yeah, seriously. Oh, and then, the stuff about the boats and the zombies in the water.
The really unrealistic submarine.
Yeah, the unrealistic submarine escape and
they came back and nuked China's government.
The guys with the deep sea diving stuff. It's like he tried to think of like every remote location, right? It's like a James Bond movie. He's got to ski, he's got to parachute into the mountain and then ski. Right, and then he's got to drive a car, have a boat race. He went down the checklist. Right, he's got the outer space, underwater.
Inception did the same thing.
Out of an airplane. I don't think was there any car. I don't think there was a car situation. But
there weren't that many cars left.
Yeah, he had tank situations though, definitely. And Humvee situations. So, it's like he went through every possible environment. Up in the mountains, down on the beach, he went off the whole checklist.
But they all kind of felt the same.
It's like a video game, right? You got to have the forest level and the city level and the snow level.
Also, his whole thing about Cuba and how Cuba becomes a world economic power and somehow funds the world war. Cuba's little. Not only is Cuba little, but geographically where it is, there's no way it would have been okay.
You know what it is? It's a lot like DMZ, right? You come with something that is never gonna happen.
Yeah, what if Manhattan was the line?
You come up with just some really, quote, cool idea that is completely unrealistic and unfeasible, right?
Like Yonkers. Why was Yonkers the standoff point? Why did that?
I don't know. But it's he just like Yonkers. I don't know. But in DMZ, they get away with it because DMZ is really about the characters more so, and it sort of also has these it's like these shorter stories about, in a very small environment, and it's the same characters. You're building on them and learning about them.
But this was really more about the world.
Yeah, this is like a world building thing, which I think is why nerds like it, right? I mean, nerds, seem to love, the world building. That's why they love all these like D&D campaign settings, so much. It's like, oh my God, it's in that campaign setting. Oh my God, it's his Dark Sun on it. It's the greatest. Even though it might be the stupidest story in the universe, it's in that setting. So like they get their,
I mean, there's a place for settings. I think the only thing I really agree with you with, because I like some Forgotten Realms books, even though I haven't read Forgotten Realms books since I was in middle school, high school, early high school. Yeah. But with the world, I think nerds are generally obsessed with world building and that sort of thing in literature and in video games and everything. I mean, look at how many people play D&D, and they're obsessed with the rules of like building your keep and maintaining it, and playing that specifically, playing Sim Keep.
I think it's more that it's like people get obsessed with like.
Or the lore in World of Warcraft.
Well, I mean, it's like people will read Star Wars novels, right? And it's not because some of them are better than others, obviously.
But they're not reading them because they're paragons of literature unto themselves.
Exactly. They're not reading them because they're great novels. They're reading them because they get their jollies off of the Star Wars universe. Like they're hopped up on a particular fictional setting, and that setting is enough to like, turn, poop into gold for them. Whereas me, it's like, gold is gold and poop is poop, right?
Well,
I mean, I like the Star Wars universe,
I think,
but it's like I can tell the difference between gold.
The Loch Lamora books are surprisingly popular. Is that they combine the here's a cool fantasy world, and I'm going to tell you bits about it as time goes on, with an actually good story and good writing. Well, adequate writing.
Yeah,
and all those together work.
It's better than World War Z.
World War Z gives me a kind of flat picture of a flat world with flat characters who all sound vaguely the same. I mean, the crazy, like, nerd otaku hikikomori who somehow saves the day has the same voice as the military general.
Yeah, that's kind of, I mean, you could sort of be like, well, they were both hardened by the zombie war, so now they have a similar voice. Yeah,
and his treatment of all the different countries was pretty flat and stereotypical. Like, almost everyone in Japan just killed themselves. Oh, that's what they did.
Yeah. I mean, it's like that is one thing, is while he traveled the world and showed you stories from all over the place, there wasn't a lot of he didn't really take the cultures of the different places into account as much as he took into account the geography. It's like, people around the world would react very differently because they are of different cultures and they have different outlooks on life. But
of course, he tended to always rely on either the less advanced barbaric cultures were more affected because they couldn't effectively deal with it. The dictatorships were very able to deal with it. The evil governments just killed people to save the day. The good governments tried not to kill people, and that hurt them in the end.
There's no doubt that I'm pretty sure when he was writing this book, the first thing he started with was a map, right? Like an actual map of the world. That's definitely how he started writing this book. Whereas you're supposed to write, well, I don't know how you're supposed to write because I'm not an author, but if it's a fictional book that I'm gonna write, you got to start with the character relationship kind of thing. Where you say, okay, this person's married to this person. If you start writing a book that way, I feel like that's going to result in a book I'm going to like more than a book where you start writing it by saying, okay, well, the country of Hubbadubada is next to the country of Oobadoo,
Well, one thing he did, we keep saying it's ham-fisted, but I was flipping through till I found a good example of it. I noticed whenever he needed to affect a character and make them different from other characters, he tended to just swear a lot. And the whole Cuba thing was crazy. This is just a short quote from one of the characters who basically
I don't remember a single character's name.
Nah, he was in Cuba, and he knew Castro when Cuba became a world superpower.
I actually think that is right, because all of these are technically interviews of the character. You only get the character's name once at the beginning of their chapter, right? So, to be like, oh, I went in to interview so-and-so, and that's the only time that person's name is in the book, and it doesn't repeat rarely, if ever. So you don't remember anyone's name.
But listen carefully. See if you can hear the ham that's going to bounce off your ears. This is someone who worked under Castro in the new superpower that is Cuba. Can you believe the cojones of that son of a bitch, speaking of Castro, to not only embrace the country's new democracy, but to actually take credit for it?
Who talks like that?
Genius.
I mean, right? It's basically, right?
To personally preside over the first free elections of Cuba, where the last official act was to vote himself out of power. That is why his legacy is a statue and not a bloodstain against a wall.
Right. So first of all, you can tell nobody talks like that, right? I mean, he's basically writing it as, he was, narrating it. But he had to make this character say it. So he basically was like, oh, well, this guy has to say it. Well, we'll say the word cojones at the front of it, and then it'll sound like that guy saying this thing that doesn't sound like real person dialogue at all.
But there's the ham didn't even start yet.
Oh, boy.
You're
going to keep going?
There's only one more. We have hundreds of political parties and more special interest groups than sands on our beaches. We have strikes, we have riots, we have protests, it seems, almost every day. You can see why Shea ducked out right after the revolution. It's a lot easier to blow up trains than it is to make them run on time. What is it that Mr. Churchill used to say? Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. Laughter.
Yeah.
Like,
if you're going to write dialogue, it has to sound like a person is talking.
Granted, dialogue is from what every creative person has ever told me who actually does creation as their job. Dialogue is one of the hardest things to write.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because it's easy to think, what if people... imagine someone trying to write our conversation. Actually writing down all the words that we're saying. Like, yeah, that's what they would say.
I think what... he could have done just, one thing that what I think would have significantly improved the book.
An editor?
Oh, I'm sure there was an editor. It was professionally published.
Yeah.
Is this guy who's going around doing the interviews, right? If instead of just, publishing the things that he wrote, give the new perspective of sort of, this guy, right? So show him traveling to meet the people.
Yeah, in the new world.
And then get, what this guy's, get something about this character also, he probably goes in to see someone and goes, wow, I was standing here, give me what he's thinking, right?
What that would have done
I was in this room with this totally crazy person and I was freaking out, right?
What that also would do is now you would have a way, because right now all the Sandlers and the Bobas and all these silly kind of world references to flesh out the world, if there's one contiguous narrative through the world, those things would have at least felt more fitting because you'd have a consistent narrative of the world as it is after the war instead of jumping all over the place in time and space.
Yeah, but if we can follow this one guy, we can get his reactions to all these different characters that he's going to visit. And that,
You get that a little bit.
Yeah, but I mean, it would really, I think, it's like, okay, we see a person and we hear them talking and we get their story. But it's like, if we also get how this guy reacts to the story, it's like, oh, well, that was you can tell even more so that was a crazy person or that was a badass person. It's like, oh, I felt in awe in the presence of this great general. It would make him seem more like a general and less like the same voice as every other character. And if he was totally afraid and wanted to get the hell out of there when he was visiting the crazy otaku, it would make him feel more like a crazy otaku, even though he wasn't really that crazy, than he would with the same voice as every other right? So, he could show more about these people by showing a person reacting to those people and by making the author of, the fictional author of the book, in the book, a non-character. We sort of lost this whole aspect there.
So as down as I am on the book, it's not a bad book.
It's not unreadable. It's not like, oh God, the horror. It's Crystal Triangle.
I said, and I stand by this,
Odin.
it is the worst book I have read in the last decade or so.
We don't read that many bad books.
Yeah,
it's like I said, Cowboys vs. Aliens is like the worst comic I've read in years because I don't buy really bad or read really, really bad comics.
When I read Loch Lamora, that was one of the worst written books I had read in recent memory.
Yet you're reading the second one.
Yeah, because they're just because it's the bottom of my scale doesn't mean that it's that bad.
Our scale's really high.
Yeah, it is.
Way high.
But part of it's that, Loch Lamora was written adequately, and books like The Prince of Nothing or Cavalier in Clay are written excellently. This is written mediocrely, but it also tells a pretty bland story.
Yep.
Like, you gotta have at least one of those things.
But if you're a nerd who really gets, like I said, jollies off of worlds, right, or jollies off of the fact that there are zombies.
Yeah, if you want
you think that things like a bunch of guys standing in a square with infinite ammo, oh man, that's just such a cool. You just think it's so cool.
Or what happens in Antarctica.
Oh. And you're just like, oh man, that's so cool. And if I was a teenager, this would be the awesomest, right? Because all you did when you were a teenager was think about awesome stuff like that.
Yeah, except zombies weren't big back then.
No, they weren't. But I was thinking about other stuff awesome like that, So,
what was big back then is from the 90s, action movies. A bunch of generic Libyan terrorists take over the building. Are you a bad enough dude to kick their asses?
So, I recommend the book to a certain audience, right? The audience that will enjoy it immensely. But I don't, put a stamp on it saying, this is good. It's, it's not worthy of any prizes.
This is not a book I would have read to completion were I not forced to by Scott.
I would not have read it, period, if I didn't think that, it would get people to read.
I'm curious what you guys thought of it. I mean, it was okay.
Yeah. I think that a lot of people, liked it probably for the reasons that I just said, and that I got them to read, and they're reading. Reading is good. That is the goal, is to get people to read. But from now on, I'm only going to pick books that I actually like. In fact, I'm going to pick my favoriteest books of ever. I'm going to turn the tables all the other way.
I also can't fault Max Brooks at all, because this is the next logical step. I mean, he hasn't written that much.
Yeah, he wrote that zombie survival guide, which sold so well.
Plurals.
Right, to the same audience. So now, he can just come out with this. It was a New York Times bestseller, right? If you're making money, keep it up, dude. I mean, if I was him, I wouldn't change it a bit. You wouldn't get me to buy World War Z,
hopefully,
the sequel, but
my
World War X
is that he becomes a better author. And, having written this,
you only get better with more practice.
There's no way in my mind that he goes back and looks at the book and he's like, that is perfect.
No, not at all. But if you're making money, what do you care, right? I mean...
Plus, maybe he'll get better. Maybe he'll do something else.
Dude isn't doing anything. He's a published author. He's a bestseller. I doubt he has another job besides writing.
Also, everyone we talked to, who we trust, who said this book was good, on follow-up, they all listened, without exception, to the audiobook, which apparently takes departures from the novel and has really good actors.
That is true. We are not audiobook people, and, people are going to say, audiobooks are the same as reading. Well, okay, look. If you want to get the story, right? You want to know what happened. You want to experience the drama or whatever.
You want Morgan Freeman to read it to you.
Okay, an audiobook is going to be the same or possibly even better or maybe a little bit worse, depending on the reading, than the real book, right? It's not like watching the movie where you're going to be missing all this stuff, If you watch, let's see, I don't know, Lord of the Rings, the movie, versus reading the book, right? You're missing a whole thing. It's not even the same story, really, right?
Well,
but if you hear an audiobook of Lord of the Rings that's well read, and I'm sure there's plenty of them, right? Or the radio drama, you're going to get the same story. There's not like some fact that you don't know. You know all the characters, you know what they did,
but it
what
is
they're
a different
like.
experience. Now you're beholden to the interpretation of the person reading it in terms of their inflection, their tone, their diction, their pause.
But, I mean, the real reason that I encourage reading over audiobook is because reading, the physical act of using your eyes to read a word and translate it to an idea in your brain, exercises a different muscle in your brain, right? Than does the processing audio into words, into ideas.
Well, also, listening to an audiobook, like, even if the audiobook were word for word this book, which I don't think it is, I don't know if I could listen to it, we'll see. But
I think most audiobooks are word for word the book.
Yeah, but I heard that this one took some liberties. I don't actually know.
Possible.
Because they got big actors. You don't get big actors to have them play a perfect part.
That's true.
I mean, what made Star Wars great? The fact that Harrison Ford changed the fucking lines.
I know.
But
you miss me.
Well played.
Yes, I was proud of that.
But like when you read, like reading Cavalier and Clay, or The Prince, I just keep using because they're good examples, or The Prince of Nothing, or even The Count of Monte Cristo, the physical words as they are printed on the page, the way they are arranged, the meter and the flow can be a beautiful thing. Like that is an artistry independent of the story.
Yeah, but I mean, like I was saying, the reason I want people to read a book and not the audiobook, no, even if the audiobook is good, is to exercise that muscle in your brain that is basically what's the word for when a muscle is atrophied, right? It's atrophied because you're not reading books, right? I mean, reading the internet, it's not the same muscle,
well, here,
right? There are studies about this.
I
read
will play
them.
a much more cynical role. If you want to sound like a smarter person, mispronouncing something is more kind of attuned to intelligent people, or at least it's perceived to be a trait of more intelligent people than misspelling something. Because when you misspell things, it implies that you have heard these words but not read them. If you mispronounce them, it implies that you've read these words but not heard them. And the latter definitely has a perception of more intelligence.
Yeah, but I mean...
Not true. I'm not saying... I mean, just it's something that you can use that to your advantage.
Anyway, you should, reading is important. You need to exercise all the muscles.
How can she read? How can she read?
If you just want to know the story, the audiobook does the perfect job, right? But if you actually...
kind of like, look at Harry Potter. I like the story of Harry Potter. I cannot read those books.
Right, but if you want...
I can't. So what I did, I read spoilers.
If you want
I know the whole
skill,
story.
if you want the skill and the exercise part of your brain, you got to read the book, even if, audiobook might be better. Who knows?
So if you like this and you haven't read any of the other books that we talked about, I would recommend, of all the books we've suggested in the GeekNights Book Club, reading The Lives of Locke Lamora next, because it's
the most similar of the book club books. Not that there are that many book club books.
But the difference is that Locke Lamora and World War Z do the same kinds of things. Locke Lamora just does all those things the author does them better.
It's sort of the same category of book that is not serious, but is fun and enjoyable,
But what you'll be able to do is if you're like, why are you so down on World War Z? It was fine. Read Locke Lamora, which does the same kind of thing. And hopefully by the end of it, it'll be obvious to you that it's just as a book, ignoring the story, is better written. That if that style or that, if good writing like that, well, I keep saying good, if adequate writing like that had been used in World War Z would have been a much better book, even if the story were word for word, event for event, the same.
Yep.
I guess it couldn't be word for word the same.
So when you can begin to tell what writing is better than what other writing, then you'll begin to understand what books are better than what other books.
Or in the very least,
on.
You can disagree with us intelligently.
Yeah, and the only way that you can do that is by reading a lot. If you want to argue about books and you're not well read, you basically have to shut up. So I suggest reading.
Now, consider this. I could make the argument that the bland and flat style of World War Z and that all the characters sound the same was intended to convey the idea that the entire world, all these people with different lives, different cultures, different geographies, because geography is so big, were kind of, because of the shared experience of the zombies, all became very similar. Like a world culture spawned independently of location and culture.
It was a bit of a Macrossian, Watchmenian situation. There was definitely that message was in there.
Yeah, but I could make the argument that the way it was written was intentional, even though we might perceive it as bad. If we understand, it was intentional to convey that point on multiple levels.
Anyway,
much
you can
like how Skycrawlers, a great movie, Mamoru Oshii, was very, very boring and slow.
Well, that's intentional, right? Because
yes.
The thing is...
But it was boring
and slow.
You know
that because of the meta, right? It's Mamoru Oshii, so he's doing it on purpose because you know the guy. But Max Brooks, we know him. This is a guy who gets the cheap lulls and the big sales off of Zombie Survival Guide. So you can't... you have to, the burden of proof is on you to prove to me that Max Brooks was trying to be clever like that. But you don't have to say anything to convince me that Mamoru Oshii was trying to be all snooty and pretentious.
So while the quote on the cover from the Dallas Morning News is probably the most topical and literate scare since Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, but on the back, the Onion said something pretty hilarious.
Oh, it's an Onion AV Club?
Yeah.
Okay.
They said, quote, an oversized version of hell.
I guess are we done?
I think we're done.
We had a good discussion on this book.
Yeah, it was okay. Why she yawn? This has been Geek Nights with Rim and Scott. Special thanks to DJ Pretzel for the opening music, Kat Lee for web design, and Brando K for the logos.
Be sure to visit our website at frontrowcrew.com for show notes, discussion, news, and more.
Remember, Geek Nights is not one, but 4 different shows. Sci-Tech Mondays, Gaming Tuesdays, Anime Comic Wednesdays, and Indiscriminate Thursdays.
Geek Nights is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license. Geek Nights is recorded live with no studio and no audience. But unlike those other late shows, it's actually recorded at night. I could talk about some technologies, but they're pretty boring. And it's not Monday.
All right. It's Thursday, December 9th, 2010. I'm Rim. Son of a bitch. It's Thursday, December 12th, 2010. It's not.
No, it's not. It's December 9th.